Welcome to PodCapers, the official podcast of A Place to Hang Your Cape. And this week, digital comics galore! We're talking with Alex Thomas about pipe dreams. Oh yes. Cue the music! Hello there, Capers, and as I said, welcome to PodCapers, the official podcast of A Place to Hang Your Cape. My name's Scott James Merridew, and this is the show where we talk about various geek and nerd-related topics, and are joined each week by a very special different guest. Now, as I said, we're joined by Alex Thomas of Pipedream Comics. Alex, how are you?
Hello, how are you? I'm good, thanks.
I'm very well, thank you, very well indeed. Now, we met briefly at Leamington Spa Comic Con, didn't we?
We did. I came along to your live PodCapers.
Yes, that bastion of professionalism and everything going perfectly to plan, Ines.
Exactly. In that nice kind of room which had the sort of Star Trek electric doors, and in that little side room at the chapel, which was quite an interesting little venue to have for a podcast.
Yeah, I've never been to a comic convention with so many religious iconography scattered around, but it was a really good con.
It was a great con. Had a really good day, and it's a lovely venue. It's the guys up there, Dan and Lisa, do a really good job of finding really interesting places to have conventions, and I think that's my first time in a sort of real big Catholic church for a convention. So made it the whole day a bit more interesting.
Yeah, well, it helped that there were a lot of interesting people there. A few of which at least, you featured on your site and on your sort of magazine, if you will, the pull list.
Yes. So, the pull list is my attempt to kind of put together an indie comics fanzine. I'm never quite sure whether to call it a fanzine or a magazine. It has that spirit of a fanzine, but I try and give it the sort of quality and professionalism of a magazine.
You don't need labels, as long as it's good.
If that doesn't sound like too much of a sales pitch, but that's kind of a way of doing it. I've always prided myself of it being SFX for indie comics.
Right. Yeah, that's great. It reminded me a lot of the magazines you get up here in Edinburgh during the Fringe. We get all these listings and reviews of all these different things, and it really is, based on stuff I've read, a really interesting, compact, and well put together, as it is in the title, list of all these great comics.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was kind of. So I've got a background in publishing. I used to work in magazines for 10 or so years, and then when I left that and kind of went on and did my own thing, I kind of missed making magazines. And I'd been running Pipedream Comics for a couple of years at the time I launched it, and I thought, well, I'd always kind of been a bit of a frustrated artist and writer, but never quite been good enough to be able to do it myself. And I thought, well, what I do know how to do is I know how to make magazines. And I had a website full of great content, and so I decided to put the two things together. And so I cherry-picked the best interviews and reviews that I had on the site, put it together into a magazine, put it out digitally, and thought I would see how it would go.
Yeah, well, I think it's gone very well. A lot of comics that you've talked about, we featured or talked about on this show, things stuff from Comic House, Cognition, MPCT, which I still have to practice saying because it's so hard to say, Wired Up Wrong. Also stuff from the Awesome Comics and Periwinkle and all sorts of things. And it's great because it's one of those things where he's like, oh, I know this thing. Oh, I know this thing. But it's also like, if you want to look for like the next comic you want to read, this is probably, I would say, the best resource to go through. Because you could go on Google and type in good indie comic, but you don't know what you're going to get. This is the perfect sort of directory for anyone that's looking for something to read.
Thank you. I mean, we've always kind of tried to pride ourselves and we focus on what we think is the best, you know. I've never really wanted to be mean and be spiteful about indie comics because at the end of the day, these guys have made exactly one more indie comic than I've ever made because I've never made one. So who's made an indie comic has always got an instant level of respect for me. But let's be honest, some are a lot better than others. Most are pretty good, but there's some which are truly outstanding. And our kind of mission statement is to just celebrate those books which we think are the best and that people should be checking out. And we get sent lots and lots and lots of great books every week, and trying to cover them all is no easy task. So trying to cherry pick the very best of those is a bit of a task in itself. But it's all about us trying to kind of bring people the best and the most interesting and diverse books that you can, because there's so many great books out there that your average comic reader won't necessarily find. And everyone's kind of grumbling about not being able to find the next big thing. But these books are out there, and you just have to look for them sometimes. And when you find them, then these are the books that you'll cherish and you'll love and you'll enjoy, and you'll get there at a time before other people get into them. And so that's kind of quite an exciting place to be, an exciting way to enjoy comics, I think.
Yeah, because it's all very well reading a great book, enjoying it, and then putting it down and never talking about it again. That's the point where we say, hey, have you heard about this great book, and spread the love. Because indie comics, above all else, need that. Even if you're just a person in their bedroom just reading the comic, just like go on Twitter or Facebook or one of the things all the kids use and just spread the word.
And I think that was what encouraged me to do. So when I started the site off, it was very much more focused on sort of digital comics and trying to find the next great thing with sort of comics on iPads and things like that. But it kind of never really took off in the same way that I thought it was going to. And as a kind of byproduct of doing that, I ended up discovering more indie and small press books. And actually, it was just getting into that community and meeting the people who are involved in the UK and global small press and indie community, and they're the ones who care. And you get more input, and I got more interest and more passion and more excitement from people, and I got more engagement from readers by writing about and doing stories about indie comics than I did from anything that I did with sort of the more mainstream stuff. And so, well, this is what's interesting, this is what's exciting. And actually things like rise of digital publishing, comiXology, and self-publishing apps, Kickstarter, Patreon, things like that, it's kind of what's really come out of the digital comics revolution, as allowing people to produce comics in a way that they probably never have been able to before. And that's what helps then make these great books, is that people aren't restricted by having to wait for a publisher or get a deal or kind of get picked up by a big publisher. They can do it themselves. And then with that, you get more interesting and diverse books, because people aren't being restricted and people are being able to fulfill their creative potential in ways that they probably never knew they were going to be able to do.
Yeah, there's no we need to push this character forward because this is what the focus groups really liked, or this is what are being represented in the movies now, and so we need to make sure that this character is more like the movies, which I really fucking hate. Just like, I mean, I'm fine with it like the opposite. Like if there's a character featured in a movie or a TV show and they get transplanted into the comics, fine, fair enough. It's the other way that just sends me into a white hot frenzy.
Exactly. It's like, what's wrong with actually having, a Spider-Man comic with Spider-Man where he fights a bad guy? I don't necessarily want these big overarching arcs. At the end of the day, it's kind of quite nice to have just a one and done superhero's tale, or a 6-issue arc of something that resolves. And that's where kind of, I suppose, indie really allows you to do it, because they're not caught up in that, they're not on issue 600 and something or other, and they don't have to have this, 10-year master plan of what they're going to do. You can just tell a story, and that's much more interesting, because you get a resolution at the end.
Yeah, and because every story needs to have a beginning, a middle, and end. As much as I don't want a lot of the big stuff like Marvel, Spider-Man, whatever to end, like there needs to be either some sort of finality, some sort of progression, or something. And indie comics, they're often so self-contained that they can just, as you say, just tell stories and tell good stories, which is what we all like. I mean, we could talk more about that till the cows come home, but I want to talk about Pipedream Comics itself, the website. How did that all come about?
So as I said, I was working in publishing at the time. I was a designer. I was working on Apple computing titles. It was the time of the launch of the iPad.
The frenzy begins.
It was. We were there. I was there at the beginning. It was all very exciting. This big blank tablet from Apple. What on earth is anyone going to do with it? And one of the apps that was on it was the Marvel Comics app, which was powered by comiXology. And because I designed the magazines and I was writing them at the same time, or writing for them as well. And when the digital comics came out, it's like, well, I love comics and I love Apple technology, so I'll put my hand up and write an article about digital comics. And I thought this will be a great chance for me to talk to a load of comic creators. I can live out my fanboy dream and interview famous comic creators and get some opinions. And I sent a load of interviews out, and as is always the case, I ended up with far too much content to go into my very short, 1,000-word article. So I thought, well, what am I going to do with all of this stuff? This is really interesting. I had a couple of really big names. I had Kurt Busiek, who wrote Marvels and Astro City, and Steve Gallagher and David Ellis Steve Ellis and David Gallagher, sorry, from Marvel. And I just thought, well, why don't I put together a website and I can share these interviews with people? And if it doesn't come to anything, never mind, but maybe it will. And it kind of then snowballed a bit from there. I started writing more and more, getting different artists and writers. And it was kind of then a challenge for me to get new interviews and talk to different people. And it was really just a challenge to see like which of my favorite creators I could interview and talk to. And then it gradually went on from there. And as I say, after I started doing Digital Comics of the Year awards, there were titles like Madefire, their platform, Liam Sharp over in California, who's now doing Wonder Woman. He was a big supporter of us early on because I was one of the few people writing about digital specific comics. And it kind of grew from there. But as I say, it then sort of hit a bit of a plateau, and that digital comics didn't really feel like they were growing and developing and becoming the next big thing. And that's
they've done okay, I guess, but they haven't been like the next big thing.
No, I was thinking about this the other day. In a strange way, they've kind of become like the pulp comics of the 40s and 50s have, in that it's just kind of people's way of getting loads of comics cheap and in a kind of a quite disposable way, because you don't own these books anymore. It's kind of the antithesis to that kind of collector mindset of, variant covers that are worth, hundreds and hundreds of dollars because they've got one artist on it. It's kind of like, well,
I've got the variant cover where Namor only has 3 wings on his ankles.
Exactly. I've got those 4 Stephen Platt Prophet covers from Image back in the day, those, or that rare Rob Liefeld's, character cover of a book which only lasted for 1 issue. So.
A Rob Liefeld book only lasting for 1 issue? Well, that's fucking rare.
I know, that would never happen, will it?
Because, he's made so many timeless classics, like Cable and Deadpool. Oh, that's it.
Oh, and those guys that look like Cable and Deadpool and all of those.
You mean those dozens and dozens of characters? Yes.
Yeah, those ones which are filling up my long box here, which have got all of my 90s Image collection in them, and the one which I was suckered in to buy them all back in the day.
Oh, God. Image, it was a beautiful broken promise, Image was.
It was, but then it's turned out all right, because, hey, we've got Walking Dead, and we've got Invincible, and we've got Saga, so, it worked out all right.
Yeah, we've got Walking Dead, we've got Invincible, and we've got something that I don't like.
You don't like Saga?
I don't like... Saga was fucking disappointing for me, honestly, because
How can you possibly say it's disappointing? It's one of the best comics that's been written in the last 25 years.
Everyone says that, but maybe it's just me, but I don't fucking get it, because, I love Why the Last Man. Brian K. Vaughan, I thought, was a god, and I thought, oh, he's come up with this new thing, Saga, big space fantasy thing, I am down for this. Why do people have television heads? Oh, that guy with, was it horns or antlers? He's got a sword that he says he'll never use. Oh, he's using it. Well, that was fucking quick. Wait, it's being narrated by the baby? What the fuck is this nonsense? Oh, there's a guy who says, oh, he's a really bad guy. He's a really nasty, mean guy. He's going to do horrible things. Oh, he's trying to free this small girl from sex slavery. Oh, yeah, what a monster. What? What's going on here? And it didn't grab me.
That's a shame. For me, it's the book I never got into Sandman in the 80s when it was on, and Saga for me is the modern Sandman, and it's a chance to get into this fascinating and bizarre and diverse and bold and brave and confident and just this kind of comic that you just don't get in the mainstream. That they've got this ambitious kind of Romeo and Juliet love story, but then you've got all of this subplot of parenting, and you've got this kind of just the fact that they're so
a spaceship made out of a tree.
Yeah, but it's comics. You can't look down on something for being a little bit weird and a little bit funny, because it's comics.
No, you're right. You can't.
That weirdness. You can get away with whatever you can, and Fiona Staples sure as hell gets away with as much as she can. You know, this is a comic which pushes boundaries in ways that
I saw
no other
TV
comic creator.
people trying to make a baby.
But it's interesting and brave, and you're not going to see this in Marvel. You're not going to see this, and people have to push the boundaries, and it's not just in some kind of weird, dirty corner of the internet where it's, you know, some Kickstarter which, you know, raises $200 to make
This isn't a
something
Frank
weird.
Miller production.
No, it's a
This got...
mainstream. But I thought we liked Frank Miller again. I thought he was coming back round to being sane and sensible again.
No, 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 no. He is bonkers McStuffins, and he will always be that.
I
Like,
know he.
I mean, okay,
Holy.
maybe he is becoming sane again. I don't know, but for me, like, the damage has been done. Like that period that where he was just making utter crap, and not only crap, but like really sexist crap. And it's just like, okay, if you start doing good stuff again, great, fine. That's not gonna change all the bad stuff you did.
No, there is that thing of Holy Terror is always my sort of benchmark. I was a huge Frank Miller devotee back in the day. Sin City, I absolutely adore. His Daredevil run, I absolutely love. And then Holy Terror, and then there was that kind of downhill into Dark Knight 3 and the kind of the Superman with the really strange Snuggy Pants poster that they did. That was very strange.
All-star Batman and Robin.
Yeah, the wasn't there the cover of just Wonder Woman's ass, which was particularly classy.
I mean, oh god, you know what you should do? You should look at like the scripts he writes for this stuff as well, because it's his descriptions of people and things are well, they're entertainment in their own right, and like, what the hell was he thinking sort of way. It's
Exactly.
God, he's a...
I always love the joke about All Star Batman. Was it issue 4 before they get out of the Batmobile? But it was Frank Miller and it was Jim Lee, so you know I was always going to buy every single issue of that.
Are you dense? Are you word I'm not going to use? I'm the goddamn Batman. It's
Exactly.
it's amazing in its awfulness. Thankfully, however, no such comics advertised on the pull list or on Pipedream Comics. Thank God. Now, so you've talking about digital comics and how it's sort of kind of stalled. You do sort of you have talked about some of like the alternatives to Comixology and different apps that you can use. What are some of those apps that you've over time? What do you think are some of the good ones?
So I suppose at the moment it's kind of the big one is, especially for indie comic fans, has got to be Comic House. They've kind of gone down that subscription model of having a £3 a month subscription, and you kind of get this access to this amazing library of indie comics, including a lot of the great books that we feature in the pull list. And that to me feels like a really kind of exciting project to be involved with, and to kind of a way to spread the word about indie comics and get people reading and engaged and exciting about that kind of things. There's also Sequential, it was traditionally kind of quite a graphic novel based publishing app. They had a lot of stuff from Knockabout Books. They had the early stuff from Improper Books, so books like Porcelain and The Night Post, which are both fantastic. And they also had a lot of sort of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and a lot of really interesting British stuff on there. So that's kind of a great one. And then, as I kind of mentioned earlier, there was the other big one, which is really interesting, is Madefire. So Madefire was put together by Liam Sharp, Dave Gibbons, and Ben Wolstenholme, who's a sort of really well-known graphic designer in the UK. And they put together this kind of digital comics platform, which was built around their unique way of telling comics, which was called Motion Comics, and used animation and sound to create really interesting and exciting stories. Liam definitely was pushing the boundaries of what you could get away with. He did a book called Captain Stone is Missing, which was just this crazy mix of his paintings and animation and visual effects and all sorts of things like that. And Dave Gibbons did a great series called Treatment, which he kind of conceived as an idea and was kind of sort of gritty dystopian sort of game show series. But that kind of, again, because of the time involved in creating these complex stories, again, that kind of plateaued, and they stopped producing these motion books. But because they kind of got that momentum and they got the success behind them, they've then become this quite big publishing platform, and they've got DC and Marvel and loads of the big American indies on that as well. So they've become, I think they're probably now the big sort of second app behind Comixology in terms of online digital comics, but one which not a lot of people really know about or think about, because I think most people just still go to Comixology because they have everything.
Yeah, they're the I'm trying to think where they are. They're sort of like, I don't, maybe like the Netflix of sort of digital comics, but even then, like Netflix actually thinking about it, they're doing their own comic, aren't they?
Well, they are. Well, they've bought Mark Millar's stuff, so they're kind of yeah, starting their own things. And I think his new book's coming out very soon, isn't it? And then obviously they've kind of bought up all the properties that go with all of that. So I'm imagining we've got to get lots of Mark Millar TV series coming soon, which I may be in a minority, but that's no bad thing for me.
No, I mean, Mark Millar for me is one of those things where, talking about Frank Miller, he's one of those things where he always feels like he could easily become Frank Miller, but he hasn't yet. He's walking that line between like genius and madness, and not all of his stuff is for me. Not all of his stuff is brilliant. There's sort of like this, not juvenile necessarily, but slightly less mature sort of element to it, which I actually find kind of refreshing at times, and other times I find kind of obnoxious. But it never, for me, in terms of quality of writing, never strays into bad. It never becomes
No, it's always
bad.
it's
Not for
interesting.
me, but not bad.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a Mark Millar apologist. I kind of stand up for quite a lot of his stuff. He has written some awful books. Nemesis is absolute, gutter trash. It's an appalling book. But then he wrote Ultimates, and he wrote Red Sun, and he's written Huck, and he's written Chrononauts, and he's written Jupiter's Legacy, and he's written all of these great books. And
Kingsman.
I was lucky enough to interview him once, and when you talk to him, he's got a really interesting understanding of his way of making comics, and it's his way of making comics. It's kind of almost quite old-fashioned and traditional in that he is the person in charge. He dictates how it needs to be. Every sort of thing that he goes onto a page is something he's decided it's there, and it's all about pace, and it's all about speed, and it's all about no wasted motion and no wasted words and no wasted detail in anything. And whether you like that or not, that's his template, and that's what works, and that's what creates these books, and that's what creates these books that have this energy and excitement and this unique voice, which not many people out there have.
I think even if you don't like it, it's like, can you imagine if every single comic from everyone ever was just written the same? Like that would be awful, even if it was good.
And also, it's just like how few people are there out there that you could pick up a book and read it without knowing who the writer was and be able to say, oh, well, that's so and so as a writer. There's very few people who've got that confidence in their voice. Grant Morrison, maybe Mark Miller,
Peter David,
Neil Gaiman. Yeah, I mean, there's Mark Waid, maybe even at a push, and there's very few people that you can say that about. And so whether you like it or not, that's quite an achievement to make, is to be able to create a voice and a style which is completely your own.
Yeah, well, we would be remiss to celebrate uniqueness when we find it. Even because just something is unique doesn't mean you have to like it, but it doesn't make it automatically bad either. We need variety, no matter what it is, whether it be comics or movies or just life in general. We need variety because that means we've got a big, beautiful, wide tapestry of stuff for us to enjoy.
Exactly, as I say, and it's just very interesting to hear that he is very aware of what he's doing with a lot of things, and a lot of time he often gets slagged off for being that guy who just writes comics to be turned into movie scripts, but he's writing genre fiction really, and he's picking out, he's like, oh, this is his sci-fi book, and this is his superhero book, and this is his love letter to Superman and the Golden Age, or this is his futuristic science fiction book, or this is his kind of Batman equivalent, and that's quite a clever, and it requires quite a good understanding of what you're doing, or an understanding of your craft, to be able to write books that are good and interesting and don't just become generic pastiches, rather than they are more often than not kind of quite fresh and original.
Yeah, people love those sort of things. Joss Whedon has been doing stuff like that for years.
Exactly.
So yeah, you can't fault for that. I don't. I try not to, at least. But going back to the indie stuff, you've done like awards like for small press indie comics and not previously digital comics, like a yearly winner.
Yeah. So we when I started off, we started doing it was just a way to kind of do everyone kind of does awards, and it was a nice way to wrap things up and just to kind of sum up everything. So we started doing a Digital Comic of the Year award for a couple of years in a row. And then I started developing as the more I was doing indie and small press stuff. We started doing an Indian Small Press Comic of the Year award, and so this last year just gone was the second time we've run it. It was won by Something City by Elise Weaver this year, and previous year it was On a Sunbeam by Tilly Walden. So we kind of build it up. So I publish a rundown of the top 50 indie comics of the year. The final 10 I kind of cherry pick as being the 10 best, and then I open it up to my readers to vote on what they believe to be the best. And so I kind of use the mindset of all 10 of the comics I feature in that top 10 are worthy of winning. It's kind of a joint top 10, and then whoever wins the public vote is kind of is awarded the prize of sort of the cherry on top.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of doing it. It's a great way of saying, like, getting it out to, the audience as well, making sure that they're the ones that make decisions. Because, I mean, if I were the one who had to pick, which comic is the best indie comic, then I just pick stuff that I'd read or stuff that really appealed to me, and it would be biased. I don't like to admit it, but for Capers, yeah, you know what? Maybe I have a few biases. I don't know if that comes across on this show. Fuck Wales. It's a problem. It's a problem I have. So it's good that you're making sure that it's fair, and it's also that it's indicative of what people like, and
I mean, it's a difficult one because I think it's as we've seen, without getting political, voting systems, they throw up as many problems as they create, but it's just our way of doing it. And as I say, I always try and put the emphasis on the fact that we don't have any books in there that I wouldn't be happy to have as the winner of the award. They're all great. In fact, nearly all the books, not nearly, I shouldn't say, all the books in the top 50 are amazing and would be worthy winners, and they're all great. And that's what we're about. We should be about celebrating what's great, and then just it helps to sort of single out a few at the end. So, and it's that way of kind of giving people maybe a sort of a mini shopping list of the things which they really definitely ought to try, and the real creme de la creme of the indie scene, because as we say, there's a hell of a lot of books out there. I can't cover a fraction of the number that I'd love to be able to write about. So being able to pick out those which absolutely stand head and shoulders above everything else, that have something interesting to say, that have artwork that stands up there with stuff from the big two, things that push boundaries, things that are new and unique. It's great to be able to get a chance to showcase that.
Yeah, because it can be such a gamble buying, well, anything really, but especially comics, just because, like, you hear good things and maybe you get a sneak peek of something and it seems quite good, and then you read it and you've already bought it by that point, so there's no really giving it back unless you want to be that person. So even if it's quite good, it may not still appeal to you, and that's why I think you're doing is so great, simply because not only to talk about, just say this is good, you also say why it's good, what's good about it, and just what its deal is, so you can make an informed decision. Because so many industries nowadays are trying to make sure people are not as informed about their purchases, so that it's sort of a, hey, you bought it now, no take backsies. And
it's that difficult thing, as you say, like if you don't like horror books, or you don't like autobiographical books, or you don't like science fiction books, if you're told that this indie book is the greatest book in the world, but you hate that genre, you're probably never going to read it, and you're never going to enjoy it in the same way that someone who's a complete devotee of that genre will. So I always try and make sure it covers that wide range of stuff, so that, I mean, I have pretty broad tastes, but there's certain genres that I don't enjoy in the same way that I would. And as you were saying, like if it was just me cherry picking, my 10 best books, there'd be certain genres that I probably wouldn't include. Whereas if I try and get a broader range of stuff, then maybe I can include stuff which may not be my choice of top 10, but of best ever book. But I'm fully prepared to admit that I'm not necessarily the be all and end all opinion in the world, which is probably a bad thing to admit for someone who runs a website all about his opinions.
No, I think it's an important thing to admit because, I mean, I'm a critic. I like to think my opinion carries weight. It doesn't. But it's like you can't say that I'm the definitive last thing that you need to hear in regards to something, because at the end of the day, I'm the second to final step, or anyone is the second final step in terms of, okay, you've heard someone else's opinion. Now I'm going to find out for myself. As long as those steps are before then, so you're not going in blind, then it's fine. You might disagree with my opinion, you might agree with my opinion, you might have a completely different opinion. It doesn't matter. The point is that we are trying to make sure people are informed, people have a good time, people know what they're getting into, and that we are spreading and promoting things that deserve to be promoted, unless of course they're the Beano or 2000 AD. Because I'm looking at an article we've done 10 of the best British comics that aren't the Beano or 2000 AD, which, I mean, as much as I love the Beano in 2000 AD, I think is a good stance to take.
I'll be completely honest. I'll hold my hands up. That is a bit of a clickbait title that I put on that, and just
surely not.
Not on the internet. Whatever next, and that's not meant to, put down the Beano or 2000 AD, because they are stalwarts of our industry. Without either, British comics wouldn't be.
My childhood was the Beano. I used to read that all the time. I think I had a subscription at one point, and it was my jam. I've never enjoyed reading about juvenile delinquents more. It was a lot of those characters were really absolute arseholes, but still we loved them for it because we were kids and we were arseholes. So it appealed to us, really.
Exactly.
God, so were you a Beano person? So were you a Beano person or a Dandy person?
I was a Beano person. I got it every Wednesday. It arrived with my dad's newspaper, and I would sit and I would read that on the bus on the way to school every week. And yeah, I loved it, and I loved growing up with that. And because I grew up in rural Dorset, we didn't have comic books store available to us. I had to, get comics from W.H. Smith and get what I could when it was available. So the Beano was the kind of the be-all and end-all for me when I was growing up. And I don't think there's many comics fans who will have grown up without it. And it's such a, as I say, it's an integral part of any comics growing up experience. Yeah. I'll be honest, 2000 AD hasn't really been as influential to me. I dipped in and dipped out. I've enjoyed Dread, but I've not read it as meticulously as some. But I appreciate and I know.
Well, then you are no longer a comic book fan. You are banned from the fandom, obviously.
Exactly. I should hang up my keyboard and hang my head in shame. But the idea with that top 10 was just to kind of, it was inspired by a Facebook conversation that had been started by Sarah Millman of NPCT fame, and saying there's the mainstream media. It's coming at a time when there was a lot of discussion about how mainstream media doesn't discuss comics, and if
they do discuss it, it's in a really patronizing way.
Yeah, it's cosplay and it's movies. Yeah. And her point was also that, well, it's also, if you talk about British comics, it's the Beano, it's 2000 AD, and it's everything written by Alan Moore. So what is there that is great that isn't any of those three things? And I just finished reading Charlie's War for the first time by Pat Mills, which just absolutely blew me away. Button Man by John Wagner and Rock of the Reds. Again, going back to Leamington, so he just released the Rock of the Reds compilation, or the first volume of that, and that was fantastic. And I've been a follower of the work of the Phoenix since it launched as a kind of it's one of the ones that launched as a digital comic app way back in the time when I was focusing on digital comics in that way, and I fell in love with the Etherington brothers' work through meeting them at conventions. And I was just like, well, here's a list of 5 great books that I can just think of off the top of my head that I could create a list for, and then I'll just flesh that out with some more other great titles that I can come up with. And yeah, that kind of list came together quite easily. I could have written probably another 10 or 20. I'm feeling guilty about
10 more of the best British comics that aren't the Beano 2080.
Spoiler, that'll be coming soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, because there's such a wealth of stuff out there that needs to be talked about.
Exactly, and as you say, that's not to. I didn't want it to disparage the likes of Alan Moore or the Beano or 2000 AD. I mean,
But they don't
I
need
look,
promoting.
I've
They're
got enough
fine.
there. So
Yeah, so we need to focus on the things that don't have a voice or don't have as much exposure, and expose them for the world to see, which sounds a
yeah,
bit weird now that I say that out loud. That sounds a bit no, a bit sex crimey.
so
No,
that's
we'll move on from that. Oh god.
to say. So that's why I picked up this books like Porcelain, which we've mentioned again. Which Porcelain is one of those books which I think if anybody's looking to get into independent comics or intelligent, articulate books, that's the book that you give people to tell them this is what UK indie comics is all about, because it's hands down as good as anything that is being published by Image or Marvel or DC. It's just the best thing in the world. And then there's books like The Trolltooth Wars, which I absolutely love as well, by P.J. Montgomery and Gav Mitchell. And then I wanted to include at the end this roundup of small press, and because I kind of feel like small press, there's so much great stuff going on out there that people don't necessarily know about. And really, small press is what is the British comic scene at the moment is what I'm saying. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that's what's the beating heart of UK comics at the moment. That's where great creators are coming from and going off to the big time. That's where the interesting stories are coming from. At least I think they are. And so we should be celebrating small press. And that was kind of my get out jail free card of trying to mention all these other things that I wanted to include, because there's so many great books that you could mention.
Yeah, not that you need a reason. Just talk about this. Like, hey, great books. Read now. God, so
Exactly.
what are you reading now? Like in your spare time, if you have any.
Spare time. There's not a lot of that at the moment. So the books I'm kind of really into, I've just finished writing about and reviewing Dead India, which is the new book by Hamish Steele. He's published by No Brow Press. He did a book called Pantheon last year, which was a kind of cartoon or comic retelling of the Egyptian gods. And Dead India is about a group of kids who work in a theme park, which is also a gateway to hell. And it's kind of got a Rick
I've
and
had jobs
Morty.
like that.
But these are actual demons, and they have a pug which is possessed by the spirit of a demon king. And it's got a very, as I say, real Adult Swim kind of Rick and Morty, Adventure Time kind of anarchic, cartoon series vibe to it. So that's really great. I've also just picked up new books by a guy called Todd Oliver, I picked up his books boxes at the end of last year. I met him at True Believers back in February, and he's just about to release a new book called Smedley, which is this kind of very strange, surreal book about a worm-shaped man and all the kind of antics that he get up to. And it's kind of it's got a very old school kind of toxic oink comics kind of vibe to it. It's very surreal, very strange, quite rude. A
Well,
lot of
a
poo.
quote from the man himself: "You can never have too many poo-related jokes."
Exactly, and especially when it comes to a giant worm-shaped man. So that's a lot of fun. And I'm also currently obsessed with anything drawn by a guy called Russell Olson, who I met again at True Believers. He's just finished a book called Gateway City, which is this beautiful kind of 30s and 40s crime noir meets science fiction story about a kind of Midwest city which has a gateway to another dimension in it. And he's also just finished a book called Lady Hollywood, which is a really kind of cool 80s neon noir kind of crime thriller and a very kind of Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips kind of vibe to it. But so that's kind of what I'm into at the moment.
That sounds really fascinating. I'm still reading actually. So I picked this up at Leamington Comic Con. The Adventures of Captain Winston Bulldog.
Yes.
Have you read that?
I'm struggling to remember the creator's name, but I do remember. I did pop by
Jason
his store.
Cobley.
Yes, that's it. I'm sorry, Jason, for forgetting your name. But yeah, no. Is it good? Worth picking up and checking out?
I mean, I'm like a third of the way through. There's a lot of. It's like a big compilation book, and frankly, I'm fascinated with it. There's a lot of really good stuff. It's very weird. It's like a giant anthropomorphic bulldog fighting other anthropomorphic animals and humans and vegetable people, and it's sort of like, it felt to me very reminiscent of the very early Judge Dredd stories, where it was kind of serious, but they were also having kind of fun. Like, here's Judge Dredd on the moon. Oh, he's got a robot psychic called Walter the Wobot who cries oil, and it's a bit funnier than that. It's a bit more self-aware, a bit more tongue-in-cheek than that. But it feels very much like that. And it's got its sort of fun, very how can I put this? Very British sense of humour. It just makes it really fun, and the artwork is really good. It's different art, and I just found it so fascinating because, I mean, from what I can tell, it was like mail order or postal order comics. Like, oh, you want to read a comic? Okay, you got to send out for it, and then we'll deliver it to you or something like that.
That's cool. No, I'll definitely have to check that one out. Like I say, it was one of the guys who I remember seeing at Leamington, and yeah, I popped by. I think he was in the middle of a Kickstarter or just finishing up with one, but yeah, I didn't get a chance to check it out at the time. And thinking of other books from Leamington, Away by John Late is a phenomenal read if you get a chance. Just been published by Marcosia, about a firefighter who kind of is tasked with being the savior of the universe, but he has to go off and do missions while he's asleep. So he kind of sleeps in
Astral
his sort
projection?
Yeah, well, no, he has these sort of moments where he goes off and has these other missions, but then he comes back to his body, kind of Quantum Leap style, and he's in the middle of a conversation with his wife, or he's just woken up, or things like that. And so it's a really interesting story dealing with the idea of sort of long time away from loved ones and doing really important things, but not being able to talk about it with them. It's a really interesting book. It's John's best book by a mile, and it's really interesting. I think it's going to be a book which leads to really big things for him. So would highly recommend that if you get a chance.
And now I've got the Quantum Leap theme stuck in my head. Oh god. Also, I was...
Oh boy.
Oh, yeah. Oh god. I've also been reading, this is less indie, but it's something I thought was really interesting. The Dark Crystal Creation Myths by Brian Froud. I can never remember how you pronounce his name. This is fucking... It is amazing. I don't know about amazing, but it's really intriguing. It's because have you seen the Dark Crystal rather?
I'm going to sort of be slightly shamed here and say no. I kind of missed that particular boat when I was growing up. So.
Well, it was a bit of a cult hit. It wasn't something that didn't have a great big impact when it first arrived. Maybe because I think was it before or after Labyrinth? I think it was after, but
yeah. Around that kind of time, it was always a bit darker and a bit weirder than
very tonally different than a lot of other Jim Henson stuff. But I really loved it. And this is a prequel comic to it, talking about the formation of the world, Thra, or Thar, I think it's called, and talks about some of the characters that we see and some of the races that we see in that movie. I won't spoil it for you. And just how certain events from the movie came to be. I'd recommend watching the movie because not only is it, I think it's a pretty good story. Characters leave something a bit to be desired, but I think they're still okay, I guess. But the creative nature of the movie with all the puppets and the animatronics and stuff is amazing. You believe these creatures are real, Alex?
You mean they're not?
Oh, yes, they are. Yes, they are. They're all Gelflings. The lot. They're real. They're real. They're as real as the Muppets. Oh God, I love the Muppets so much.
Good. That's good news. That's all right. I always kind of love books like that because it gives you that kind of backstory to films and TV shows that if you kind of want to find those backstories out, you can. You don't have to have it, forced down your throat like you would with certain movie prequels.
Are you thinking of any ones in particular?
Oh, Prometheus and the Alien Saga is my kind of go-to for completely pointless and wasted prequels that you don't really need.
Pretty movie, kind of a waste of time.
It's what, sorry?
Pretty movie, kind of a waste of time. Like, it was a very nice thing to watch and the performances were good, but in terms of, like, actual effectiveness within like the Alien canon, it was
It's just
kind of
boring.
yeah. I don't know about boring, but it was just sort of like we don't need this. You could skip this movie and go straight to Alien Isolation, and you wouldn't really miss anything. I did like it, and I think there's nothing wrong with having like a standalone thing, but it kind of. I think they sort of missed a trick by sort of promoting it as like, oh, this is going to explain so much, and this is going to be like really important for the alien lore, and it really wasn't. It was just a pretty decent movie, and that's it. I say pretty
I was going to say,
decent
it's
because
explaining
there's
mysteries that you don't want explained. It's, there's certain things that you don't necessarily always want to peek behind the curtain and find out what the story is. The space jockey's a lot more interesting and a lot more enigmatic by not knowing why that's there, because really it's just a conduit for the story, for the aliens to get from here to there. Finding out why they're there, it's a bit like kind of going inside the sausage factory and finding out the secrets in there, isn't it? Whereas
you know what it is? It's midichlorians. That's what
really
it is.
is.
Oh, God, that's a.
And I was trying to steer clear of mentioning that particular movie franchise because
Oh no! It's too late! It's too late! It's happening! It's happening! Coming! It is a scientific explanation for something that's supposed to be mystical, and even then, I thought you had a perfectly good explanation. And like, if you want to have something that's going to measure like the force, okay, I get that. That could be an important storytelling technique, but you don't really need it because you just say, "Oh, this guy feels really stronger." How strong does he feel? He feels stronger in the force than Master Yoda. Well, holy fuck, that's great. And why do you need a chart like for actually measuring these things? How do you fucking measure them? And if it's off the charts, like what? And there's a number of midichlorians in like the whole body. What? I can't go on. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
sorry, I didn't realize that was going to be quite such a Pandora's box of ranting.
I feel strongly about Star Wars. Anyone who's listened to the Solo review will know this.
We need to steer clear of that because I've yet to see Solo, so
I will not spoil it for you. Don't worry. Don't worry. Oh God. Something else we've got to talk about, and obviously I think we mentioned in the beginning, but anyway, we met at Leamington Comic Con, and so what are some of the other conventions you've been to recently, and what are some of the conventions you're going to?
So my upcoming list is a little bit empty at the moment, but True Believers is always a regular on my calendar. I think that's just one of the best run events in the country. They do a fantastic job there. Really great mix of indie small press and good name guests, and in a really lovely venue. Leamington is another hit. I've been to pretty much all of the events there. They run a really great small convention again, with a very much a focus on Indian small press. I went to LCAF for the first time last year, which was really interesting. That's very much more kind of down the art school zine illustration end of comics, and it's kind of a very different crowd that you might get at some of the larger conventions. But equally, you get a lot more interesting stuff there. So you get the kind of crossover with a lot of people. So guys like Avery Hill, No Brow. There's a lot of really interesting creators there.
The Awesome Comics podcast people, have you caught up with them at all?
Yeah, catch up with those guys whenever I can. Really like what they're doing with their anthology, and again, they're another one of these guys, groups like yourself that kind of spread the word and do a great job of promoting Indian small press comics to a wider audience. And so it's great that there are these things out there to help create the community and create these ways that people can kind of bring together their hobby. And I've certainly found plenty of books through them that I've then gone on to champion or to discuss on my site as well.
So what's some of the best things you found at a con or discovered through people at a con that you've talked about or you experienced just in general?
Well, I guess it's kind of that it's meeting these people who have made your book, or whose books you've read in the past, and you've kind of either conversed with them only over email or Twitter or Facebook, or just have only read their books. So as I say, there's guys like the Etherington brothers. I love their work. I love their passion about stuff. They've always, whenever I go to a con and get a chance to chat to them, they are always just the most encouraging and the most enthusiastic guys you could ever meet. Nick Prolix and his book Slang Pictorial, which I think is just about to come out. That's, I love his work and really love discovering his stuff, and he's a fantastic guy. Sarah Millman's work, NPCT, Heart of Time, Rachel Smith's stuff. Wired Up Wrong was just one of the most incredible books of last year. Really resonates with a lot of people dealing with mental health and anxiety issues. And then there's guys like Mike Garley. I love his stuff. The Reckless Hero guys who make these amazing sort of 90s inspired books that are the kind of things that I used to read in my teenage years, and they're come to life again, but with these amazing production values, produced by just these guys who aren't full-time professionals. The list goes on. I could be here all night just listing off amazing, but it's just great.
Well, go. Okay, then do it. Start a list.
To meet all of these people who make all of these stuff, and to find out how passionate and excited they are about what they produce. We were mentioning before we came on John Locke and Nick Angel and the Afterlife Inc. and the Big Bunch Studios guys who are about to put together their Comic Summit event, which is coming up in July, which should hopefully be a really great chance for small press and indie creators to get together and talk about what their concerns are. And that's again one of those things that Awesome Comics do so well, is that they create a voice for the community, and it stops it just being a load of message boards where people bitch about cosplayers not buying comics and things like that. It's actually a chance for people to get together and talk about techniques and input on how to run Kickstarters and how to run Patreons and how to run crowdfunding, and how to ink and how to color and how to letter and what to pay people, and what is a good comic and what is a bad comic and what's a good way to be a comic creator.
Just a proper support network. I talked about this with John Locke, and just making sure that people just. I think what it comes down to is a great way of making sure that people have answers to questions that they might not even think to ask. Because if I was going to start a comic, I'm sure I would have a ton of questions, but I would still miss stuff out. Stuff wouldn't just even occur to me. Because why would it?
And it's great to just see people doing things. I always kind of feel like the great thing, one of the things that kind of inspired me to put together the pull list in the first place was, this mindset of just do it. If you want to do something, if you want to make a comic,
Do it! Make your dreams come true!
Exactly. If it sucks, then you've made a comic. You learn from that experience. You might get better. You might be able to develop a knot. But even if you haven't, you will have gained a valuable experience from putting that together. And you can say that you've done it. And took tables at conventions last year for the first time because I wanted to sell the pull list, but I also wanted to get that experience of what it was like being sat behind behind a table at a convention, and you get a very different perspective being behind the table than you do being in front of it. And I get to experience that kind of awkwardness.
So how was that experience for you?
It was really good, really interesting, really informative. Like I say, it gives you a really different perspective on what other creators go through. When you are, sat there at a table for 8 hours and, people are walking past your stall and not making eye contact with you for large periods of the day.
If we have to look at him, then we'll have to buy something. Oh, God.
Exactly. Then we might have to show interest and ask questions about what he's doing. But it's just...
At a comic convention? I mean, my God.
I know, but then you also get a chance to you've got a base for people to come to you and talk to you about things. So you get people come up to you, say, "Oh, I know your website," or "I know your work," and so actually you kind of when you're going around, and you guys probably know this from doing conventions, you get to talk to people, but then as soon as an actual paying punter comes up, you kind of feel like you need to move out of the way because you can't stop and talk to them for ages because there's actual money coming and to talk to people. So
you're there to chat. They're there to try and support themselves.
Exactly. So it's a great chance to kind of see that perspective of what people actually go through, and also just it made me kind of focus in on what works and what works for the magazine and what works for the site and what do people care about, what's interesting. But then also it just had me a chance to. So I went to Nottingham for the first time last year, had a table up there, and it was great. And I got to meet a different set of people, and you get that fun of being able to go in early and set up, and you deal with a real different range.
Organising.
Yay, there's nothing quite like logistics.
Be still my beating heart. Oh God.
So yeah, so it was all a great experience, and so that's kind of yeah. I think I'd encourage people if you're just new to the world of comics, definitely give it a try, and pick out one of these smaller conventions. Don't necessarily go straight into an MCM or a Showmasters and then think, hey, no, everyone's here just dressed up as Deadpool. Why is nobody buying my comic
That's,
about
that's like a lamb to the wolves. It's throwing yourself right in the deep end. It's a nightmare. I mean,
exactly.
I've been to. I'll admit something to you. I've been to all of 3 conventions in my life. The first 2 were London Film and Comic Con. The third was Leamington Spa, and the difference between the 2 of them is astounding. First of all, London Film and Comic Con wasn't in a church, so there's that. But also just the amount of people and the atmosphere and that sort of thing. It is markedly different.
Yeah, I mean, I've not been to one of the big MCMs. I went to London Super Comic Con, and the scale of that was something else to behold. But then you compare it nicely with the True Believers. They run a summer variant, and last year's one we had a table there, and it was in a friary, and there was maybe 20 or 30 tables, and it was really small and intimate, and it was great. You got a really good chance to have a chat to people and actually have engaged people who cared about what you were doing because they were coming to look at comics. And if they weren't, they were just coming to see what the hell was going on here and just wanted to find out more about what you were doing. So it's kind of that was really kind of a really nice alternative to these kind of big soulless events.
Yeah, exactly. So now one thing I want to talk about, because you mentioned it before we started, and you've been holding out on me. You got a podcast somewhere.
Oh, that's just another little side project that I do with one of my friends from uni. I do a podcast called Balustrade's World of Interesting Things. I used to be in a band with one of my longtime friends called Matt Carter. We were called Balustrade. We found ourselves recording the odd podcast here and there, but we found ourselves enjoying doing podcasts more than we did recording songs. And so we started doing more podcasts than songs. And so we started doing those. So we talk about books and films and all kinds of weird and strange things. It's kind of just our way to do something a little bit different and hang out and catch up and talk comics, talk films, talk music, and
Talk.
just again this and talk and literally talk, seeing as we now live in different counties. So yeah, so it's a nice chance to do that. But again, it's a kind of a bit like the pipe dream comics and the pull list. It's a way to encourage me to try new things and to learn. And I launched the website because I wanted to learn how to make a website, because I wanted to learn how to do that for my job, and I wanted to learn how to do social media marketing. And this is all quite boring and dry, but
So you're one of those people that you find, oh, I might like to do this, and then you just go and fucking do it. I cannot.
Yeah, which is the best way to do it, and you learn by your successes and you learn by your failures. And
I don't do that. I have to be dragged into things that are good for me and interesting experiences. I'm like, oh no, I don't want to do a podcast, David. Oh, no, you're fucking doing it. Oh, okay. Hello there, Capers. And then I find I fucking love it. So
Exactly. No, well, that's the thing. You don't find out that you're going to do it until you try it. And I mean, I've always often maybe been a bit victim of the fact I keep things relatively small scale, but I still, I released the pull list as a digital only edition the first time it came out because I thought no one would buy it. And a few people did, and then it got more and more, and then I did print runs, and we kind of built it out from there. So I think even if you don't have the courage to go ahead and go all out and release a new, comic with full color art with a paid artist and a huge print run, just the ability now you can literally go out. All you need is a Squarespace account or a Wix.com account or a WordPress account, and you can publish a comic online and you can create a webcomic and you can share that with the world. And maybe 6 people will read it, but that's still 6 people more than will read it if it only exists in your head.
if 0 people read it, then at least you could say, well, I did it. I did something. I put it out there. And as I said, there's so many people like me who are just doing nothing, just sitting around in their flats all day, saying, oh, I'm going to do big things one day, but they never do. Oh, God, wasting my life.
People talk about, hey, what do you do? And then you've got this back catalogue of stuff that you can do. And, if you aren't great about sort of talking about what you do, then you can, showcase these things to other people. And people will, The internet is full of scary and strange people, but it's also full of really friendly, helpful, and encouraging people. And
I should know. I'm one of the scary and strange people.
I thought you were going to say you were one of the encouraging, nice people there for a second.
Nope, I'm the people your mother's warned you about. Oh God, we try to be nice and friendly, and we try and do things because there are so many things out there that deserve to be promoted, as we keep saying, and so many things that deserve the chance and the spotlight, because there are so many things that in the mainstream that don't deserve the spotlight, but they're there, and many other things that do, but the spotlight just sort of assumed and accepted, and it's always there, and there's enough light to go around. I think what you're doing with Pipedream Comics and with the pull list is really, really genuinely helping.
Thank you. Like I say, and it means a lot to hear that, again, people get a chance to check it out and read it and discover it, and that people say they find these books from it, and people say that reviews that we write have meaning, and that first moment you see a pull quote on the back of a book which somebody has taken the time to include because your opinion matters. It's a great thing, but it's something that people can do. All you have to do is be passionate and care about what you're doing, and generally not be a bit of a dick about it all. If you're encouraging,
oh, well, that's me out then. Oh God.
You can kind of you have your voice, and that's what it's all about, really.
Yeah, well, I think you're making a real effort with that, and it's working out really well. On that note, I think we're going to end the show. Thank you very much, Alex, for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me.
Alex, where can people find your stuff?
Okay, so the website is www.pipedreamcomics.co.uk, and you can pick up the pull list at our Gumroad store, which is gumroad.com/pipedreamcomics. There's 9 issues on there at the moment. The latest one is a small press sci-fi special, which has got an awesome Captain Cosmic cover by Andy Clift. So be sure to check that out. And the previous issue has got our rundown of the top 50 indie comics of 2017 in it. Each issue is 99p. Apart from the first issue and the issue 8, which are free to download, or if you really want to, it's got a pay what you think it's worth subscription thing in. So if you want to pay £1,000 for it, you can, or you can pay 99p for it, whatever you think is best.
Well, I think when you say pay what it's worth, I think that's going to turn out to be a lot. What some people might think you're worth is not always, however, what you are actually worth. And for my money, I think you're worth quite a bit.
Thank you.
Not at all, not at all. And if you enjoyed the show, Capers, please tell your friends, shout it from the rooftops. And if you haven't already, go back and listen to some of our other super episodes, like our episode with John Locke talking about the Comic Summit. It's going to be great, I'm sure. And you can listen to the show on iTunes, Podbean, YouTube, or at podcapers.com. We have a Patreon. Check out the rewards, patreon.com/AP2HYC. If you want to get in touch with us, suggest show topics, or maybe you want to come on the show yourself, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at AP2HYC, or email us at podcapers@ap2hyc.com. Thank you very much to Dan Harris for our logo, the lovely microphone, the red and blue 3D glasses, those are mine, and thank you for listening. This has been PodCapers, the official podcast of a place to hang your cape. Cue the music!